it's possible to argue that the whole notion of therapy is meaningless because it's based upon a completely false concept, which is false because it doesn't exist anywhere in the real world apart from the world of concept, where it does exist. This isn't a popular argument because it goes against the grain of everything that we're led to believe. But it's a strong argument. It's very strong. So, okay, I have to put my hands up and admit it's unlikely to find much of an audience. That's fair enough. But on the plus side, it's a really, really strong, it's a really good argument. It has huge integrity and it's very, very interesting. It just doesn't happen to fit our conventional way of looking at things. But isn't that true of anything that's worth a damn? Everything comes as an act of rebellion. We're all either plagiarists or revolutionaries, as your man says, whose name I can't remember, but that's Gauguin, that's what he says. Either a plagiarist, shamelessly copying what others have said, or you're a revolutionary and nobody's going to like you. They're going to evict you from the building, throw you out onto the street with your belongings, with your bag thrown out as well. So, therapy, as we understand the term, is meaningless because it can only ever be meaningful if the concept of self is meaningful. Now, of course, we never ever interrogate this idea of self. Yes, we're philosophers or something like that, sociologists. But generally we don't. And that's why this argument never really arises, because we don't dig deep enough. We preoccupy ourselves with skimming around the surface instead. The self. When we talk about the self, that's a kind of experience. We have the experience of being a self. In other words, a constant point from which to observe the world. So my experience of myself as a self means I'm always the same and stuff is happening to me. So stuff can happen, that's different, but I'm always the same. I am a constant. Through minute, hour through hour, it's the same old me. That's the experience that we have. So it's understandable enough we say, yes, I am me, because there is this entity there which we can speak of in this way. But there is a very big flaw with this, because there is nothing in the whole wide universe that, in an unchanged fashion, passes on from moment to moment in a continuous fashion, in a linear fashion. There's nothing in the whole universe that does that, ever. It's ridiculous. There's nothing in this universe but ungrounded change, constant becoming, something different, something different, something different. The whole notion of things staying the same comes out of our thinking, because thinking is the way that we have of statically representing the world to ourselves. Now, if I statically represent the world to myself, there will be lots of static things in that representation, including my conception of myself. But it's just a picture. It's just a static representation in a universe where all is flux, as Heraclitus said. And so it's just this desperate attempt to deny the fact that all is flux, which we could see for ourselves. Or, as the Buddhists would say, All phenomena are transient. Everything's transient. Nothing's there forever. And there couldn't be anything there forever because there's no thing in the first place. Because when everything is transient, when everything is flux, there's never any things. There's just change. In order to have a thing, we'd have to have something which doesn't change, which is the one thing that never happens. So the self is a construct. It's an artifact of the thinking process. The thinking process has to represent things as unchanging constants because it simply doesn't have any other way of getting a grip on them otherwise. There's no way to get a grip on something unless it is an unchanging constant. So if we want a world that we can get a grip on, we need a static world, and that means we need an unreal world. So the idea that there is a self means that if this self gets out of kilter, if something happens to it so it's not right in some way, it's misbehaving or not functioning properly, then we can do something to the self to correct it, to make it not malfunctioning. That's therapy. Do the stuff, whatever it is, the hocus pocus, whatever the hell it is. But the thing is, if there is no self there, then what the hell are we, what does it mean? What are we doing? We're trying to rescue an illusion. We're trying to promote an illusion and keep an illusion to be believable to us so that we don't come anywhere close to seeing that it is an illusion. Now, in one sense, we could say, okay, that's therapy, isn't it? We're maintaining our illusions and we feel better when we maintain our illusions, or some of them anyway, definitely the illusion of self. So isn't it legitimate to put a lot of time and effort and research into figuring out how to repair this illusion if it goes wonky? And of course, that's what we do the whole time. Our whole lives are spent trying to repair the illusion when it goes wonky, or trying to improve the illusion, make it better, and bigger and better illusions. That's what we do. That's all of our purposeful activity, all of that rational activity. It's all about benefiting the self. What the hell else would it be about? And the self doesn't exist. So like Wei Wu Wei says in one of his little things that he says, because he says lots of little things, he says, why are you unhappy? Question. And the answer is, because 99.9% of everything you do is for yourself, and there isn't any. Simple enough to understand. So anything we do on behalf of the self that doesn't exist is going to be kind of awfully hollow and lacking in anything that's going to help us, really. It's a futile action that doesn't admit itself to be futile. And similarly, any therapy that we engage on to help the self is similarly hollow. It's an exercise in suffering, prolonging suffering and exacerbating suffering and putting a kind of finesse on the original suffering that was there. We finesse it a bit with our therapy. So therapy is all about finessing the emotional suffering that is there in the first place, because we have this whole notion that, yes, there is a self, and the self shouldn't be like the way it is, it should be something else. And if the self isn't like what we say it should be, then that's really, really bad, and there's no good in that at all. That's just bad news. It's just pure bad. So that's where our love affair with the illusion of the unchanging self gets us. We fall down a hole. Well, we were in a hole anyway, as long as we were clinging to the illusion. But we're in a deeper hole, a darker and smellier and more rotten hole, a sinister hole. Now, there is something that happens to this idea of the self, and that what happens to the idea of the self in day-to-day life, it tends to get knocked, it tends to get abraded, roughed up a bit, insulted, and lots of other things that can actually make it lose its shine, make it not be what originally we thought it was supposed to be. So that's called the influence of reality. The influence of reality is to destroy illusions. What else would it be? Reality is what destroys our illusions. And when all of our illusions have been destroyed, well, what can be left apart from reality? So, as I was saying, what we call therapy is an attempt to kind of postpone this action of reality, to put it on hold, to delay it, or maybe even reverse it for a short while by shoring up the ego, by shoring up the self-image. So what we call therapy is actually trying to reverse a really helpful process in life, which is where the illusion gets shown up to be the illusion. It's where the self-concept gets, it kind of cracks up and falls to pieces. Now, if that happened, and I suppose it's happening for me, and I'm watching it happen, because I will be watching it happen. I'm going to be watching it happen, but I'm not trying to do therapy. I'm not trying to fix it again. Well, what happens there? And what happens is my attachment to this particular illusion weakens, and I become unattached to it eventually. Now, the disidentification, the process of becoming not attached to it, is slow and painful. And I can't really see it for what it is at the time. So I'm not sitting there thinking, this is good. I'm becoming disidentified with this false notion that I have of this false and limiting notion of who I am. Wow, this is really great, because it's not really like that. The way I experience it, it is that I am cracking up. I am falling into this dysfunctional state. So I have to go with that. It's not an intellectual concept. I can't rationalize it. I have to go with what it feels like, and it feels the worst anything could feel. So it's not exactly an easy thing. But nevertheless, for the sake of the argument, supposing that I don't go for therapy and I don't try and fix it, what will happen then? That's the end of the illusion. I don't have to do anything to hasten or ensure the cracking up of this illusion. There's no doing involved. There can't be any doing involved, because all purposeful doing is based on some kind of notion we have of how things are and how they should be. Now, our notion of how things are is wrong. Everything the mind says is wrong. It's just a conventional map there. It's not meant to be taken too seriously. How I think things should be is also wrong. It's nonsense. We don't know how things should be. We don't know how things are. Doing comes out of some kind of solid or concrete concepts. So take that concept away, there's no doing. So in other words, what's going on can't be called therapy because nobody is doing it. I'm not doing it. Sure as hell no one else is doing it. It's doing itself. It's a natural process. All that is needed is to see the illusion as it says in one of the Mahayana sutras. That's sufficient to see the illusion. You don't have to fight the illusion or do something to destabilize it. anything we do to try and fight the illusion reifies the illusion. It makes it more real to us. Because the mere fact that we're fighting against it means it must be real, because what the hell would we be doing fighting against something if it wasn't real? So anything we argue with, anything we resist, we make it real. But supposing I'm not resisting, and in practice I will be resisting, but just supposing I don't resist, then this process will happen, and that concept will disappear, or my attachment to it will become lessened at any rate, and I'll feel better. Because as long as I'm attached to an unreal notion, I have no future apart from suffering. There's no way around that, really. We can't base everything on an illusion that we refuse to admit to be illusion, and in any way expect any good outcome from that. On the other hand, if I am courageous enough to see the illusion to be an illusion and go along with that, I will feel better. But it isn't therapy. It's just the natural process which we can't interfere with. We'd love to interfere because we are interferers. That's what we do. We're born interferers, monkeying around with this, monkeying around with that in such a hurry we never stop to see what happens if we don't monkey around with it. But we can't interfere with this process because as soon as we do, we're doing it on the basis of thought, and thought is seeing everything in a wrong way. Thought really assumes things and acts blindly on the basis of these assumptions. That's not a good recipe. Whereas awareness, on the other hand, doesn't assume anything. Awareness is the state of remaining open without any judgment about what is real and what isn't real. It's also the state of, you can also relate it to the state of being able to tolerate uncertainty, because reality is uncertain. Of course, if it's constantly changing in the process of becoming, it is uncertainty. It is the quintessence of uncertainty. Are we happy with that? Not really, but if we can kind of practice hanging out there in this uncertainty, which is equivalent to the psychological idea of psychological risk. We're risking everything instead of trying to hold on to what we think we know, but we don't really know. So the risk is the liberation. Taking the risk is the liberation. And thought will never do that, because thought will not take risks, because it always has to have the calculations. It has to calculate everything out in advance, because it is a calculator. What else can it do? It's not a risk taker. It might take a calculated risk, but to take a huge risk with absolutely no idea whether it's going to work out or not, which is what existence is. Existence is a colossal risk. It's not going to do that. So there is absolutely no question that everything we tend to call therapy, and this isn't necessarily true, because there could be a type of existential, experiential therapy which doesn't involve thinking and labeling and saying, try to do things on purpose. That's okay. But then again, you can't really call it therapy in the strict sense, because no one is doing anything to anybody. We're just getting into the thick of it and seeing what happens. So again, it comes down to risk-taking and seeing what happens. And seeing what happens means not opposing or resisting the natural process. But the way we are these days, everything is rational, everything is based on this idea that we can choose well-being, we can choose wellness, we can choose whatever. Choosing just means that thought is shuffling between its categories. Oh, I have 10 categories here. I'll choose this one, and not the other ones. But all those categories are unreal. They're all bullshit. Choosing is bullshit. Reality is choiceless, as Krishnamurti says. When we're in a reality that we didn't choose, we're actually in reality and not a mind-constructed virtual reality. which is inhabited by a mind-created virtual self. Now, all of this might sound a little bit philosophical or something, but it all comes down to letting go. We let go of our constructs, then we'll be surprised. But the surprise isn't, it's not like the universe has bad stuff to do that it's going to do to us. The surprise is a good surprise. It's a surprise that we didn't see it coming, but it's good, not bad. It's liberating. So everything we think is good is imprisoning, and the big risk that we're afraid to take is liberating, which is what I just said 5 minutes ago. We're just saying it again in a slightly different way. So suppose, to try and bring this back, this little short discussion back to something something tangible. Supposing I am in a state of mental suffering and distress. I really do want therapy. I really do want to fix it. There's no two ways around that. But at the same time, if I'd had a long experience of trying to therapize that stuff away, or going on this therapy and that therapy, and it hasn't worked, what do I do then? It seems like the end of the road, but it isn't, because it's actually necessary and helpful to see through this idea that we can fix ourselves or be fixed by others. We have to make the mistake many times before we can see it to be a mistake. So that again is part of the natural process. But it's possible we could get to feel pretty hopeless. It's not just possible, it's pretty much on the cards. We'll feel hopeless then, because a road has been closed in front of us, therapy road. So there will be despair, which is what a lot of philosophers have said. Nietzsche, lots of people. Everything begins with Ramdas. Everything begins with despair. You have to give up on the illusion, which you don't know to be illusion before you can actually see the real road that lies ahead. The real road that lies ahead is the natural process. And that's got nothing to do with making the self better, the self-concept, this construct that we have. It has everything to do with letting go of it.